name's Roger Lee, and I'm here today to talk to Adrian Smith, who is the editor of European Urban and Regional Studies, a journal which is produced by SAGE. Adrian, one of the things that intrigues me about your journal is the title. It's got some very interesting words in the title: European, urban, regional, all of which have had lots of debates around them. Is that one of the reasons which attracted you to the journal as an editor? And is that something which interests you, the nature of these complex ideas?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think I first came across the journal back in the mid-1990s, just after it was established, and at that time, of course, Europe was a very contested notion. The boundaries and extent of Europe were very much under debate in the context of the post-communist transitions that were going on at that time, and around the meanings of Europe. And so that kind of contested understanding of Europe was really a very attractive thing that the journal brought. And for me, the combination of thinking about Europe in that way, through its focus on urban and regional change, which were and continue to be the primary areas of my own research, was really what was attractive to me. And of course, as you rightly say, urban and regional are also complex and contested ideas, and the journal, I think, has been one of those at the forefront of attempts to think through the nature of urban and regional change in the contemporary world environment that we live today.
It's certainly gone through a number of different Europes, that's for sure, in its history. But what was the origin of the journal? How did it emerge, and in what context did it arrive on the scene?
The journal was set up in the early to mid-1990s by Ray Hudson, David Sadler and Jim Lewis at Durham University, and Alan Williams at Exeter University. And it was set up in the context of two things, really. One was the momentous changes that were taking place in Europe in the early 1990s as Eastern and Central Europe was emerging out of the collapse of state socialism. And the journal was, I think, at the forefront of trying to think through the urban, regional and geographical consequences of those changes, not just in Eastern Europe, but of course their implications for the West, and how that increasingly interconnectedness of Europe was also transforming spaces in Western Europe. But it also came out of the context of the vibrancy of debates in urban and regional political economy at that time around how we theorise urban and regional change. And of course many of the original editorial group were at the forefront of those debates and publishing widely in that area. So those were the origins of the journal.
Do you think the journal still bears that imprint in terms of what it's currently doing? Has that imprint lasted, as it were? I'm sure we'll talk about what the journal currently does, but it's just interesting to know whether that starting point, that history, has an influence now.
Yes, very much so. And I mean, we're a journal that is different from perhaps more mainstream regional economics type journals. We publish quite a lot that is of a more critical nature, critical political economy approaches to urban and regional change. But it's also an open journal in the sense that we do also publish material that draws upon different methodologies, but to address substantive questions facing urban and regional change in Europe today.
So how would you describe the aims and scope of the journal now, as it currently addresses those problems which of course haven't gone away? In fact, they've become more complicated, in some senses more serious.
Well, the journal very much focuses primarily on the publication of high quality research that addresses, from its title, urban and regional change in Europe, and it conceives of Europe widely, not in a tightly bounded sense. And we have also been developing over the last 12 to 18 months some new initiatives around the importance of thinking about the interdependencies between European urban and regional spaces and the wider world, in the sense of trying to understand and unpick global processes that are impinging on the transformation of urban and regional space within Europe. So it's still very much grounded in the origins of the journal, but also taking on some new initiatives and bringing in work that is comparative, not only publishing work which has a European focus, but in special issues that also deal with other contexts and case studies, to bring a comparative dimension to the journal through more strongly.
Yeah, well, we mentioned earlier on that European, urban and regional are all contested and complex ideas. Could you say a little bit more about maybe how you think around questions, first of all, say, of Europe in the journal? What sorts of concepts, ideas around the notion of Europe are you working with and would like to work with?
Well, the journal's published papers that have dealt with that question in different ways. I think, in essence, the journal has a sense of Europe as a variegated, contested space that is diverse and fluid and changing. So, for example, some years ago, there was a collection of papers published that were looking at different traditions of urban and regional research and from different language contexts, and trying to bring together a conversation between urban and regional scholars across Europe about how those different traditions can be brought together, and the extent to which they can be brought together, or the extent to which they retain and continue to retain distinctiveness in that process of thinking about the variegated and contested nature of European urban and regional change.
Obviously, then you'll be receiving a large number of papers on a very broad range of themes and topics. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about how the editorial board works and how papers that come in are then dealt with by the editorial board.
So yes, the journal operates with a team of 6 editors, myself as editor-in-chief plus 5 other editors, and an editorial board which acts as an advisory board of about 20 members from across Europe and also internationally. When we receive a paper submission from the journal, the editor-in-chief, myself currently, will look at the paper and take an initial judgment as to whether it's suitable, usually with the advice of another member of the editorial team, one of the other 5. And so we, as a team, would look at the papers that are submitted, and then if we feel that the papers meet the quality standards of the journal and are thematically appropriate to the journal, papers are then sent out in a double-blind review process to to reviewers, both in Europe and beyond, who are experts in their field. Then when we receive the reviewers' reports back from those reviewers, a decision is made about the paper and its progress, whether it's to accept the paper as it is, which is very rare, or to request revisions of to a different extent, or indeed to reject the paper. And that's the process by which we deal with paper submissions.
And with such a diverse and rich array of editors, do you actually meet together to discuss possibilities for the journal, new initiatives and so on? Or are these very much emergent in terms of papers being submitted or ideas that people bring to you, or is it a mix of both of those things?
It's very much a mix of both. We react to and send out for review, as I described, papers that are submitted. We're very open to the continued submission of good quality research from across Europe and across the world that fits the remit of the journal. But also we do meet as an editorial team, usually twice a year, in which we discuss various initiatives that we wish to pursue. Those may be around particular special issues, that we wish to commission. We've also been commissioning recently some more review type papers that survey the relevant field, and we also meet to discuss initiatives around holding journal workshops and conferences.
Okay, so and have you got any particular initiatives that are, as it were, emergent at the moment in terms of new directions that the journal might move in?
Yes, well, one of those connects to that point that I made earlier about the journal moving towards thinking about the interdependencies of European urban regional change with the wider world more fully. And so we've commissioned a series of papers, for example, for a special issue that we hope will be appearing in the 2013 volume of the journal, which examine that precise question in different geographical contexts. So one of the papers, for example, that will appear in that is examining the changing interrelations between production networks between Germany and China, and its implications both for Chinese production and also European Union production networks in relation to solar power production. We also have papers accepted for that special issue that think through the interrelationships between Europe and North Africa, and particularly in the context of the so-called Arab Spring, the interrelationships between European spaces and North African spaces through the control and regulation of migration flows, and how that impinges on the kind of geopolitical dimensions of urban and regional change in Europe.
So yes, again, I mean, the whole idea of Europe constantly changing, the whole idea of urban and regional constantly changing. So this is a journal which is very much at the cutting edge, really, of what's going on in Europe at a certain scale.
Yes, very much so, yes, and that's where we hope the future direction of the journal will lie.
Well, given this diverse editorial board and the diversity of papers that you have, could you just outline the broad range of papers that you publish, the sorts of different kinds of possibilities for potential authors to submit to the journal?
Yes, there are three main forms of papers that we publish. One is standard 8,000 word approximately papers that are conceptually informed, empirically grounded research, and those are primarily the papers that the journal publishes. But we also publish shorter papers of around 2,000 words, which we call Euro commentaries, and those are designed to be papers that are we can publish relatively quickly. We have a lighter touch peer review process to those papers, and the idea is that those papers engage with very current contemporary issues and can therefore appear in the journal much more quickly than a standard paper, which takes a longer time to review. And that enables the journal, I think, to publish work that is very much engaged in contemporary issues, both of a policy kind, but also of an issue-based kind as well. And we're hoping that next year, in the 2013 volume of the journal, we'll have a collection of Euro commentary papers that are some short reflections on the contested urban conflicts that are taking place across Mediterranean spaces in Europe, both in the southern Mediterranean member state countries of the European Union, so in Madrid, in Athens, in the context of the Euro crisis and reactions to that, and also in the context of North African urban spaces, which of course very much been the focus of urban protest and urban conflict in the 2011 Arab Spring revolution. So I think there's some really interesting conversations that those shorter papers can bring to the journal. And the third main aspect of papers that we publish are book reviews, short book reviews of books published on and about European urban and regional change, and from different languages as well. We have occasionally published reviews of books that have been published not in English, by asking expert reviewers with the necessary language skills to review those books. So those are the three main formats of papers that the journal publishes.
And I think, as far as I understand it, the journal actually doesn't just simply publish papers. It is actually a means to generate different kinds of events, which obviously deal with the sorts of issues that you've been talking about. Could you actually say a little bit more about the kinds of events that the journal's involved in, beyond the simple publishing of the kind of work that you've described?
Yes, that's very much the case, in that the journal holds every 2 years a conference in a different location across Europe. The last one was held in Vienna. It was a very successful conference with over 100 delegates, and the next conference is planned for 2013 at the University of Sussex in Brighton in England. And one of the attractive aspects of that conference is not only that, of course, it's a way of generating papers that then may become submitted to the journal for consideration for publication, but it's over the years brought together a group of colleagues from across Europe who tend to come back year upon year to that conference, and generating a series of discussions which run through time, not only in different places across Europe. And that's been a very important part of creating a more integrated community of scholars working on issues that are related to the journal's interests. In addition to the conference, we also hold occasional workshops, which are more focused, usually one-day events where we commission papers to be presented and discussed in a workshop environment. There was one held a couple of years ago at London School of Economics on migration and mobility in Europe, which generated a special issue. And a couple of years ago, I organised a workshop at Queen Mary, University of London, where we brought together scholars who were reflecting on 20 years of post-socialist transformations in East Central Europe and their implications for urban and regional change, and our thinking about Europe and the impacts of post-socialism on how we understand Europe and its geographical transformations. And again, that generated a collection of papers that became part of a special issue. So there's a whole range of additional events that I like to think creates a community of scholars that are very much engaged with and part of the journal's wider community. And
I guess that although you could argue, or you might think that a journal with the title European Urban and Regional Studies has a rather specific focus, what you've been saying about the journal is just how wide each of those key terms actually is in terms of shaping both the past and the present and the future of the journal. So maybe one final question would be to say, despite the fact that it's a focused journal in one sense, I imagine that the citation indices, for example, are very favourable in terms of the journal because of its openness and its developmental trajectory.
Yes, very much so, and we were very pleased this year, for example, in the 2011 citation reports for the journal to be ranked very highly in the urban studies grouping of journals, in which it appears, and I think that's reflective of the fact that the journal does reach an audience across Europe, but also beyond Europe, and it's widely regarded and used by scholars working around the world. We were very pleased with that outcome.
And presumably the authorship is multidisciplinary, I imagine.
Yes, it is. We do speak across disciplines. The journal publishes work by geographers, urban policy analysts, by people working in urban sociology. One of our future new editors is an urban sociologist. We publish work by people in business and management and political economy. Anyone who works on issues that the journal focuses on is very much welcome to engage with the journal and to submit work to it for our consideration.
So the disciplinary range is as it were, is as wide as a substantive range, and as open and as developmental, I imagine, as that is, and will constantly change into the future.
Yes, very much so. And I think those things are important. That interdisciplinary approach is very important in understanding the manifold changes that European urban and regional spaces and places are experiencing today. I don't think any one particular disciplinary environment can address those questions. And a journal like ours has to engage in interdisciplinary discussions and conversations.
Great, well thanks very much, Adrian, and it's an amazing journal covering an enormous range of material and obviously very, very dynamic, and it's been very interesting to hear all about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.